Welcome, thinkers, to Season 3, Episode 9 of Thinking Critically. Today's topic is education. So today I'm joined by Sam Cheung, known online as the Educational DM. Thank you ever so much for joining us today, Sam. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you for having me down. Well, I have been a teacher for probably 23, 24 years now. I teach maths to currently 13 to 18-year-olds, but most of my career it's been from 10, 11 to 18. So in the UK, that's secondary school. Mm-hmm. But I started playing D&D when my dad bought me a box set from a car boot sale. Now, if you're not from the UK, you probably won't know what a car boot sale is, but they're these wonderful just junk sales. Anyway, he bought me a set when I think I was just turned 10, and I never really looked back. I just had a love. Well, I had a love for fantasy before that. And then just only the last few years, maybe 5 years or so, I've started playing with my students, Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah, that's me.
Awesome. I've not, out of all the guests I've had, finding it in a car boot is one I haven't heard yet. So I love that's great. And you didn't just buy it from Amazon like me, like a chump. So I do.
In the 80s, so this is back in the 80s.
Yeah.
Amazon didn't exist, the internet wasn't around. And my dad was just a great lover of these car boot sales. He'd just wander around for hours and poke, and it was fun for us kids. And he'd give us a little bit of money. But he knew I loved fantasy, and he bought this for me. And my older brother played a little bit of D&D, mm-hmm. so he said yes, this will be good for him. Mm-hmm. But then proceeded not to help me do anything at all, learn about the game at all. He just let me play it. So I just had to teach myself completely from scratch for firstly friends from church, but also friends from school, and just run things. And it was complete chaos, but we had fun, and that's all that matters, really.
Indeed. Well, talking of teaching yourself, today's topic is education. So what does that mean to you in the D&D framework?
Well, so as I said, I started playing Dungeons and Dragons with my students about 5 years ago. Actually, it was one of the students who suggested, why don't we play D&D? And I thought, why haven't I done this before? And then after a year or so, I was running a campaign with these students, and all of a sudden, everything in me as an educator suddenly started realizing it's hitting so many of the kind of educational points, not just in the academic arena, but something that's always interested me more than just, I love teaching maths, I really do, but I would say I'm more of a schoolmaster than a maths teacher. Mm-hmm. So I love the pastoral side. So I've worked in a couple of boarding schools, and I was a deputy housemaster in a boarding house for a while, and just seeing, something that always catches my eye when I read the news is things like, what are the skills that companies want that schools aren't teaching? Mm-hmm. Things like critical thinking, communication, all of these kind of things, innovation and, creativity, all of these things that I actually do think that schools do teach them, but sometimes they get put in little boxes in schools and labeled, we are now teaching creativity or something like that. Mm-hmm. But certainly I think critical thinking is a massive one. And morality, actually, that was actually my first article I wrote about kind of moral values and ethics. So these things were being learnt, not so much taught, but learnt through playing D&D. So I'll give you the big example, which really just hit it home for me. I was running through one of the Adventurous League settings, and they had to climb a hill, so a mound of boulders. And I said, "What are you going to do?" to the party, and they said, "Oh, we're just going to climb." And I got them to roll, and the wizard, who had particularly low strength, fell down, and was hurt himself. And I said, "What are you guys going to do now?" It's like, "Well, we're going to wait." And so he rolled again, and he got up to about the halfway point, and then he rolled a second time to get to the rest of the way, and he fell down again, and he was bleeding out at the bottom. And eventually, and I asked the rest of the party, "He's unconscious, bleeding out. What are you going to do?" And one of the kind of more experienced players then just said, "Okay, guys, hold on to my rope. I'm going to shimmy down. I'm going to heal him, stick a health potion in him, and then I'm going to help him come back up." And after the session, I said, "Guys, what could we have done a bit differently?" And there was silence. And then I was thinking, "Okay, have a look in your backpacks. Have a look at your character sheets." It's like, rope, grappling hooks. We just thought that was, that was flavor text, or that was just there for kind of extra design. And I mean, these boys were generally really avid video game players.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, why don't they kind of have this critical? This is what I would say is critical thinking. Why don't they have this critical thinking to come up with these ideas? And I realized actually, so for example, I know that when I play a computer game, I love role-playing games. I don't get enough time to play them. But generally, there's an item that you pick up specifically for a task.
Yes.
So these are the old school role-playing games. So there might be a kind of a magic key that fits a specific door, or you pick up a rope and then there's a specific kind of wall that you have to use the rope to climb, etc. But this stuff was already in their backpacks, and this stuff is general. And in D&D, there's just so much stuff that you can have that is, and then it becomes about your invention and your use of that. But the other thing about role-playing games in computer games, and I have to confess, I'm very guilty of this. If you come across a difficult challenge, you have a go at it a couple of times, and then what do you do? If you get really frustrated about it, what do you do? Nowadays, you just go and look it up online, right? Except with D&D, you can't do that.
Yeah.
And I can't remember who it was. I think it might have been Matt Colville who said that if you take 10 Dungeons and Dragons parties to get into a castle, they will come up with 10 different ways. So some of them might try and bribe the guard. Some of them might kind of try and hide in a cart of hay. Some of them will try and fly over the wall or wait until night and creep over the wall. Some might actually dig under the wall, but they'll come up with all sorts of different ways. So even if you're playing the same module, you can't go up and look online and say, this is the right way of doing it, because there is no right way, And that comes back to this idea of critical thinking and innovation and learning on your feet, and and I think that's so powerful. And then the consequences of the potential failure. I love this idea of failing forward as well.
Yeah.
But so even without knowing it, you're learning about things. This is what makes the difference between experienced players and non-experienced players. That they have these tools in their belt. But they're also learning other things. They're learning about, as I said, morality, and by that I'm talking about just not doing the thing that might upset your party members, stealing from your party members, or just playing that character that's going to upset everybody. Realizing that the treasure is not the end. I mean.
Are you gonna say it's the friends that we made along the way? Is that what you're getting at?
I am gonna say that. I really am. It's terrible, but it's true. and this is an education. This is an education not just in those kind of academic qualities. This is an education in life. And I think that's incredibly powerful. And since I've then started becoming, in some ways evangelistic about this, I just rave about this to everyone. I've discovered all of these people and places online that are now using D&D in tremendous ways. So I'm in contact with an ethics professor who is using D&D in her ethics classes. The Game to Grow guys are doing both education and psychology classes, and that's incredibly powerful that you can use it in psychology. I've been talking to people who are using it for autistic kids, and people who are in prisons and seeing some great results about kind of that. And I can just imagine, these people who are in prison and anyway, I could go on.
Yeah. No, yeah, I totally get what you mean. And thank you so much for that. It's your passion shines through, so it's lovely to hear. And I mean, I've had to get my notebook out because you're covering so many things there that I'm absolutely going to forget that I had something to add to that. So, I mean, my first and easiest thought on that then is: do you think? I mean, I think I know the answer. I think way back when the game was designed, in the 70s and 80s, it was never conceived as a vehicle for learning. Do you think nowadays that maybe that focus has shifted a little bit? I mean, I know you got to learn the rules, so there's an element in any game. There's an element of learning the constraints, like even with video game RPGs, there's a level of that. But what we're talking about, and what I really want to talk about more, is this learning. I don't want to use meta learning because then I'm blurring the definition of the word meta in this context. But learning about the ethics, about morals, about comprehension and critical thinking, all that kind of stuff. So do you think it's a conscious part of the design in these later editions at all? That would be an output of playing the game?
Well, I mean, interestingly, in the 90s, I remember seeing an advert for it in the 90s, and I saw that it was actually being marketed as something that would stretch the brightest students. So I think they've always been aware of that. And to be honest with you, I mean, so Dungeons and Dragons, as you probably know, came out of strategic games roots. So being aware of that, they certainly pushed towards boys, who are interested in nerdy boys who are interested in kind of strategy. And certainly, I've known quite a few people who are play D&D in a strategic way. I think what people are discovering now is, and I think that streamers like Critical Roles, and so many other streamers are discovering, how it can draw on the role playing and the drama. And people are discovering from that, because you're encouraging role play, you are encouraging social skills. So this is why it's useful for people with autism, but also, again, nerdy boys or kind of shy girls. Yeah, I mean, that's a bit of a generalization.
Yes,
I know, but, and I've seen it in my games. Actually, with one of my adult games, we had a young chap who was a little bit shy, and the rest of us were experienced gamers and other experienced role players. And it just so happened that we came across a young dragon, and he was the only one who could speak Draconic. And so as a DM, I said, the rest of you can't say anything. This young chap who's quite shy is going to, communicate with this white dragon. What do you say? And he kind of ummed and ahed and came out with, come with us and we can help find you a bigger place to live and to kill goblins. And, and it came through. I mean, I got him to roll a fairly easy DC. And the look on his face, and just after that, he opened up and so much just because of that success. And I think some people are now consciously working on those things. So people who are applying role-playing games are working on those consciously. So I'm talking to a few game designers who are doing that. One guy is working specifically on working with the deaf community. So I don't know whether you know the Innsbrucks and Hatchling DM. Rich is there. He designed a game where you have to communicate with sign language.
Oh, yeah, that actually rings a bell. Actually, yeah, I have heard about that on the grapevine.
Yeah, and he works with youth in that sense, and he's. But there are other gamers who, I mean, for example, I think it's the RPG Wonder Home, which is a particularly it's specifically designed to be not there's no combat in it at all, and again, I think that's aimed primarily at young people and children who are learning the joys of discovering the world. And I think that might it's not formal education, but it is certainly an education of sorts, and definitely building these things into the games for little kids. I think that they will definitely think about educational aspects. But other than that, I just think that there are so many educational benefits, even if people don't realize it. exploration is one of the three pillars of the of D&D, and that in itself is education. I mean,
Yeah.
when you know, people talk about the joys of traveling, and since I've come out to Malaysia, I've had to, I've not had to, but I've loved traveling around Southeast Asia and discovering some amazing places. And now I can talk about those experiences, and that's been a real education.
The best kind of education is when you don't even know it's happening.
Exactly.
It's just super fun. A couple of things off the back of that, actually, to loop back round to what you were saying earlier on about the climbing up the boulders anecdote. I wanted to say, if it makes anyone feel any better, my players who are all, they tell me they're all adults, but they routinely forget what's in their bags. There was just quite a few points of mirroring, like it's kind of like ageless. A lot of these problems are ageless, which I'm very fond of, like just being like, oh, we did have pythons or pitons in our bag, and we were just trying to climb this cliff wall. Why didn't we use those? Or why did we do some weird, like, I'll cast fly on me and you, and then the druid turns into a bear, and it's like just a bird. A bear's not going to climb up. Well, actually, some bears are good at climbing, but a bird and climb up and stuff. And it was like, you've got like, you're carrying around like 20 pounds of metal, like for this express purpose.
And they bought rope. Everyone comes with like 50 foot of rope.
Yeah.
You know, why don't you send your best climber up first? You know, why do you all have to climb up at the same time? And, you know, these kind of things. It's it made me tear my hair out because, as I said, actually it was interesting because in that group were, I think, off the top of my head, I think 3 of the best mathematicians in the school from different year groups. I mean, these are kids who are going to go off to the top universities, and some of the others were actually incredibly capable. There's one who is one of the top debaters as well, and incredibly well read and eloquent. But these guys just hadn't thought of these things.
Yeah.
But I think the more they play, the more they will realize that they can do these things, and I think that's you're completely right. It goes for adults as well.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And I think it's very, very true. And I people often joke to me, how do I put on my CV, and I think unfortunately, especially in UK and elsewhere, it's still got a bit too much of a nerdy connotations for people to want to put on their CV. But I don't think it's going to be long. I think within 10 years, people are going to see that it's something to really show off about. And I really hope to see that.
Well, I'd like to consider myself at the vanguard of that, although it's not on my CV or resume for my American listeners just yet. In my current employment, I rolled the dice metaphorically during my interview at the typical question you get of, what do you enjoy in your spare time? And I was like, I play a bunch of, D&D, which is, as you quite put, is a bit of a level of risk there, certainly today in the UK, and it paid off because one of the interviewers was like, "Oh yeah, I used to play that in the '80s and bish bash bosh," and he is now in my game of 2 years and 65 sessions. Brilliant. So that was one of my few gambits that actually paid off in the end. So
I think as a teacher, it's less frowned upon because you get all sorts of different teachers, and teachers generally, it's not a problem. If you're a maths teacher, then you can be as nerdy as you are. It's actually positively encouraged to be nerdy as a maths teacher. But so I'm not afraid to put up my CV.
The other thing you mentioned there about the friends you made along the way, and again, this is tying back into the ageless thing, is I was speaking to my players recently, and I was like, guys, I don't know about you, but to me it feels like, it's quite long, and we're not going to end for another 2 years maybe. And I was more, I was worried when I shouldn't have been, that I was not wasting their time, but needlessly dragging it out. And all of them were like, no, the journey's what's important. We don't we know there's an end. We trust you that there'll be a payoff at some point that will be rewarding, but we're enjoying the crazy wacky stuff that you're putting in front of us as we go through. So that's don't worry about it, download, just continue on. And I was like, oh guys.
I mean, there is just something to be said. It doesn't matter what you're doing, but just meeting up with other people and just enjoying food and banter and everything else. So that in itself is the social aspect is a wonderful kind of outcome. So I wrote an article just recently about how Dungeons and Dragons helps you make friends, which is really, I mean, that's something that I think is really interesting, because again, that's not what people would think of education. It's like, you're a teacher. It's not your job to help our children make friends. So a few years ago, about 4 years ago, I went to something called a Positive Schools conference. And there's a part of me that certainly is a kind of a little bit cynical, all this kind of like well-being and fuzzy stuff. But, and there's that little part of me, and especially when I'm tired. But, the majority of me is kind of, yes, this is kind of like, let's see how we can really engage children, and stuff. But sometimes I'm kind of very cynical about some of the speakers who are a little bit kind of very, let's say, emotional and emotive, etc. But the two main speakers were incredibly impressive. There was one. So the main takeaway for that for me was that the main speaker backed up a lot of her arguments with kind of her experience, but she spoke with authority on this, and she also drew on the statistics, which always helps me as a mathematician. Statistics are always good,
I'm sure.
But, the main thing that she said, that has really, really stuck with me, is that the biggest factor in a child's well-being, mental health and well-being, is their friends. Okay. The second, but that's not so much. There's only so much we can do about that. The biggest thing that a school can do for their pupils is give them a sense of belonging. And I was working in a boarding house at the time, and I was thinking, yes, that's absolutely what we are working for, getting them to be a community and feeling as if they're belonging. But that idea of kind of friendship as being the most important thing for a kind of the mental health and well-being of a child, and obviously that has knock-on effects to adults as well.
Sure.
And I think especially during these last 2 years, it's been, I think, incredibly difficult for a lot of people.
Yeah,
those friendships and that kind of that community has been difficult, much more difficult with everyone being isolated and things like that.
Yeah, no, I've semi recently been suffering with a few light mental health issues as well, and we actually had to cancel DMing a game because I was just essentially written off for the week and a half. And I know that one of my players and friends, he's dealt with something similar in the past, so he was helping me kind of work through the issues. And then near the end I was like, you spent a lot of time listening to me and talking to me, so thank you so much. And he was like, man, you don't understand like how much of a rock that you've been as the DM for like 2 years. You've given us consistency, which is like super important. So he was like, you've given us consistent social interaction for 2 years, one of which was in lockdown. So he was like, that I still owe you something, so please don't worry about it. I was like, never really thought of it. Like sometimes I approach it like a job almost, and it's without being paid. But then when he put it like that, I was like, wow, I didn't realize it was that quite important to you. And I think it's very easy to forget that, especially when I can't see the wood for the trees as the DM.
Yeah, that's great. I think sometimes it is really hard when you're DMing to kind of see how much they are benefiting and gaining out of that, I think. But this is why, in some ways, sometimes I really miss playing. I mean, I gain so much out of DMing, but I miss playing as well.
Yes.
Because then you're part of the group. And I had a brief period a couple of years ago where we actually had I was playing with somebody else, and it was fun because we had again a different group of people who some of them were very good. Yeah, actually, I've got one colleague who is very good at strategizing, and I love to strategize as well. So we would bounce off each other. But then there was one week where we were trying to free some slaves from a slave wagon. And we found this little kind of area where we knew that they were going to camp, and we'd set up these traps. So, and then it turned into the next week, and he was missing.
Oh no!
So we'd set up all these traps around, and we were going to kind of frighten them and scare them, and then try and attack the wagon and take the slaves out. Yeah, this narrow channel that the traps hadn't been set. We'd set the traps all in the woods all around. and it just completely went wrong. Just my teammates, my party members, just actually they ran into our own traps.
Oh God, that's as wrong as it can get.
Yeah. But it was just, that kind of thing is just fun. We can talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
There was this great moment right at the end of, so I ran with that group. The first game that I ran was the Sunless Citadel, and I don't know whether you know it, but at the end there's a big bad and there's a tree and etc. But one of the players was a kind of a wild magic sorcerer, and just the wrong roll, or rather maybe just the right roll.
Yeah.
And his magic went wrong, and he had created a fireball centered on him. Half the party was unconscious.
Jeez.
Took out the big bad guy, 2 of his big henchmen, and took out the tree as well. So there was no worries about the spores from the tree. It just kind of, because the fireball took them all out. And that was just such an epic way to finish the game.
Yeah.
And we still laugh about it now. And we're actually, so I started a shop actually in Johor so I've got a shop manager who's running that. I'm not doing that while I'm teaching at the same time. But we're thinking about setting up some kind of bar area. We're actually going to name the bar, thinking about naming the bar after this character, because he was a halfling brewer, wild magic sorcerer.
Yeah.
So he would have, he actually came to me before the game and asked me whether, he could have some magic beers, and I said, let's work out something, maybe some healing beers, or, and if you take too many, you'll get drunk and you'll have, concentration issues, but, and one that will kind of stave off exhaustion, etc. So we'll kind of work these things out. And that's wonderfully creative as well, which is another learning outcome, which is, something I'm writing an article on now. But those stories are great. There's a psychologist who talks about D&D and psychology. She runs, called Megan Connell. I don't know whether you've heard of her.
Not yet.
So she runs a YouTube channel, but she also runs a clinical group, D&D group with girls. And one thing that she always says that rings really true for me is that when you play, you don't play as a third person. You don't kind of say, oh, my character, well, you kind of do say my character is going to do this, but that's you. And then when you're reminiscing about it, you don't say, do you remember when my character did this? You say, do you remember when we did this?
Yeah.
So it's, even though it's one step removed, you are still kind of very, very much invested in it. It's you doing those things, especially when it gets exciting. It's you going through the adventures. It's you killing the monsters, you achieving that triumph. And so as a psychologist, you can, she was saying that you can work through the issues that you might have much more safely, but also you are going, it's a safe environment because you can pull them out immediately, but also you've got a slight distance, but you are really invested in that person. So that's a really interesting dynamic that you've got there, and it's incredibly useful, I think.
Yeah. I always say, actually before that, I wanted to pick up on something we mentioned right at the beginning, that I'm super stoked that you brought up, because it validated me, because I put it in my notes and I was like, well, if Sam's saying it, then I know what I'm talking about. But it was around, like, obviously you went on face value when it comes to like sitting at a table playing D&D. A lot of it seems to be, maths and maybe like language comprehension, in terms of like trying to pass the rules and understand how the spells work, and you can and can't, and the constraints and the scopes and that kind of stuff. And then of course arithmetic for working out DCs and ACs and plus and all that kind of modifiers. Bear in mind, my mental arithmetic is terrible, so I can't do any of that stuff. That is what it is, and it serves its purpose. But I love, I've got here in my notes, critical thinking, and then I called it kind of abstract thinking around like problem solving and puzzles. And that is the kind of like the hidden layer you were alluding to earlier on of it's a quote unquote safe space to train those skills. So I've got my example in my notes here around like critical thinking. It's but why does the king want you to carry out this quest? What do they stand to benefit? It's like you know, if you can get the players to ask those kind of questions rather than just, you know, like in World of Warcraft, like just blindly follow, kill 7 wolves, okie dokie, yes sir.
Well, it does. I think it certainly does teach a certain. I mean, with any DM, I think that players certainly start to learn to be a little bit more suspicious of people and their motivations, and so it does teach that element as well. So social skills in that sense. But after a little while, if you're playing with the same DM, every NPC is not going to be an evil NPC.
Yes.
Even the worst DM, I think, is not going to make every NPC is, but certainly makes the players think and question anything that's slightly unusual that's going on. It's like, what's going on? And then learning those subtle social skills as well, those social cues. But I think also just learning with one another, and this is huge for teamwork. I mean, as a teacher, actually, I don't get to do much in the way of teamwork at all, and discussing around table stuff. I mean, we hate meetings. That's our free time.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that other jobs, teamwork is incredibly important, and I think that's an educational thing. That's one of those things that companies want that schools are not very good at teaching: teamwork.
Yes.
Yeah, I actually think that team sports are incredibly good for that. But Dungeons and Dragons, even though it does appeal to those kind of kids as well, and I think it will, given the right game. I think anyone who says, "Oh, Dungeons and Dragons is not for me," I think actually it's because you haven't found the right game. But I think there's a lot of kids who are not into sport, and for those kids who are not into sport, this is an amazing place to learn teamwork skills, to learn communication skills, to learn, how to work together to achieve something. And actually the achievement in itself, kind of like that, killing the big bad, or foiling the plot of the evil king, or whatever, kind of solving the problem, or seeing where the evil DM has come up with some plot to worked out what the DM is doing, and foiling the evil DM. But that sense of accomplishment, where are they going to get that? I mean, and especially as a group. I mean, if you do it online, yes, you do get some of that, and yes, there is actually. I think so. So some of the nowadays online gaming, I think that you can have really, really good teamwork in terms of very militaristic style teamwork, where you're fulfilling a role. But where you're then kind of, with Dungeons and Dragons, a different type of teamwork. It's where you sit down and you discuss things and you figure out how to go forward, together, and you innovate together. And I find that that generally online gaming, there is still very much people are out for themselves, even though they're part of the team. They'll still kind of rush in for the loot lust at the end and try and grab the loot, because at the end of the day, the most important person is them. It doesn't happen in Dungeons and Dragons. Well, it does to begin with. So with my students, they were arguing and jumping in and trying to grab the best loot for themselves, and that I think is a very much video game mentality.
Yeah, for sure.
But after a little while, they realize, oh, okay, let's kind of take the loot and share it and see who this is best for. Because they learn to be in a team like that and communicate.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, and this is an ageless thing. I hope I'm not like digging on my players too much, but in terms of that isolationary worldview, there are still, as I said, 60 plus sessions in, there are still occasions where I can see that coming out. And in fact, it even led to one of the player character deaths recently, because they were just so like not really having the wider picture.
Right.
But kind of the way I'd structured it, they drop down in these escape pods. It's all very like goofy sci-fi, fantasy, still high magic. And there was 2 per escape pod, 3 escape pods, but they dropped separate. So basically they were in pairs, separated by quite difficult terrain, and each of these pairs had a number of enemies to fight. And the pair in the middle were getting destroyed for various reasons. And so not only was there not really communication or teamwork between that pair in the middle, they were very much like, it's me against the world, and it's also him against the world, despite us being ostensibly a team. So not only was there not that, there was also not a communication between the other groups. So it wasn't until that guy had been dead for like 2 rounds that the other players eventually come over and be like, oh, where's Bob? Yeah, he kind of died like 30 seconds ago. And then the other characters were like, what the hell, man? why did no one tell us or scream or shout? And it's like, well, you didn't check in on them. So they're like, to make everybody feel better, that stuff is still happens. But that was very much a learning opportunity for them to be like, oh, okay, we could have potentially mitigated that a little bit with just a modicum of communication between us would have potentially saved that character's life.
Yeah, and they'll learn that for next time. They'll
Indeed.
learn that they'll remember it. I mean, this is one of the things. I used to do Duke of Edinburgh expeditions.
Oh yeah,
so I don't know whether you know that.
I'm silver DV. So yeah,
that's pretty. That's actually that is actually impressive. Doing a silver, bronze is a little bit easy. Silver is actually impressive. If you've got silver, then it's good. If you've got gold, then I am actually genuinely impressed. So I was taking these inner city London kids.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, they're from fairly wealthy backgrounds, but we're taking them out to the countryside. And they had to kind of walk for 3 days and camp for 2 nights and carry everything that they had. And I can't remember which, I think it was Prince Andrew who had gone through the military, or it might have been him. He said, the great thing about Duke of Edinburgh is that there is still the very real possibility that somebody could die, which is I mean, that's something you would never want, obviously, with students, etc., with children, etc. But there's a lot of complaint in education that we've made it too safe, and certainly in the last 10 years, they've been, I mean, it's not a new concept, but the buzzword in the last 10, 15 years has been resilience, and especially during this this last year and a half, during the pandemic, resilience is so important. And as you said, in D&D, they can die, and I cringe at people, DMs who said I would never kill my kind of, this, sometimes I post stuff online about how I can sometimes make it more difficult for my players, and they, you'll occasionally get the odd person who'll say, why would you do that? It's supposed to be fun. Well, it is fun because it's a challenge, that very real possibility of, it's actually exciting when you get the very, you've got maybe half the party who are kind of, are down, and you've got that last foe, and you're trying not to get, not to have a TPK. And that's exciting. And the very real chance of failure, the very real chance of someone dying is something that that is not only exciting and fun, but it's a learning process as well.
Yeah, I think that's another reason why, to flip it on its head a little bit, that roguelite video games are in a renaissance, quite vogue right now, because the whole process is like, if you die, you have to start back at the beginning again, and I think people really enjoy that risk. It's not just like, well, if I die, I reboot the game and I start 30 seconds down the corridor, because that, even for me, takes it a little bit out of it. But when you've invested, say, like 20 minutes into a run or whatever, and then you're back to square one, there's the drive there, and they're super popular right now. And I think one of the reasons is because of that, the risk involved. So yeah, for sure. Now, you alluded to it earlier on, actually, when I gave that example of having that critical thinking, because critical thinking is always trying to determine the facts, the objectivity, and trying to make sure you've taken out all kind of bias and subjectivity, and seeing things for what they really are, and so on and so on. An element of critical thinking. I really think about it in the way of trying to see through conspiracy theories is a very easy way for me to kind of understand it. And that's why I brought up but why does the king want to carry out this quest? But why, what do they stand to get from it? Because nothing's for free. So what are they? Why are they benefiting from it? And 9 times out of 10 it'll be a D&D quest, and it can be quite two-dimensional, but sometimes it is nefarious to some extent. And I've got in my notes that it can be a bad thing. And you mentioned earlier on, like, sometimes the players would get into that mentality of the evil DM. Every NPC has got something up their sleeve. Every NPC has got some weird, 7-year plan to foil us. And I'm like, no, that's just a small boy. Like, he is 7. He hasn't got a 7-year plan to kill you because he himself is 7. So there's that, like, it can swing too much the other way, and that very much happened with my guys after a couple of inclement individuals. The pendulum swung very much in the mistrust direction, and now certainly it is slowly starting to come back in the other direction. But I loved when you mentioned earlier on about learning each other and the DM and the other players as people as well as their characters, because they're such a huge amount of the game is trust. And it's very simplistic for me to say trust each other, because that means basically nothing. But what I mean is that, like, as I said earlier on, they trust me to have like an enjoyable journey for them. They're trusting me to have that payoff, that they're willing to go on the journey and to spend another year playing, because they know it'll be some crazy end goal that'll be super fun. And likewise, and this is something harder to build as between players and DMs, is trusting each other, both the DM trusting the players eventually not to just consider everyone some nefarious evildoer, but likewise it's a two-way street. The players have to trust the DM to not just the old granny who was selling them apples last session is stabbed you all in the back. Like, that is just lame. So the players have to trust the DM to not do that as well. And when you start to finally kind of build that trust in such a way where it all kind of meets in the middle and becomes this very self-sustaining machine of roleplay, that is the objective. That's the
sweet spot.
Yeah, that's the bit. But it's just so hard to get to because people change over time, let alone what they're role playing. So trying to keep this line.
I mean, I get asked about, because I'm working with students, how do I encourage teamwork? And this is something that I actually, I've been thinking a lot about, because obviously I'm talking about educational use of Dungeons and Dragons. How do I specifically go about hitting certain learning outcomes? And I mean, again, I wrote this about kind of making friends, etc. But I want to write another article about teamwork. I think I can't remember what it's called. The 4 elements of. Let me try and find it.
Forming, storming.
It's called Tuckman's team of group development model.
Yeah, forming, storming, normalizing, and performing. Yeah. Yeah,
and I say, I will often. Yeah, especially when the students are fighting, which happens because they, as I said, they especially they come from video game backgrounds where they will just run and grab the loot as quickly as possible, and some of them will actually be munchkins, which is I think that step up from power gamers where they'll grab all the magic items, and even if it does, it benefits them a tiny amount, kind of. And it might benefit their teammate a lot more. They'll keep hold of it.
Yes.
Say, this is mine. No, this is mine, because it gives me that.
Because one hit once a year, I'll do 1 point more damage, and that's all that matters.
So that's but they'll argue and they'll fight and actually, I'll sit back. As long as it obviously doesn't come to blows or gets too serious.
I've got this image of you sitting at the table as the table is now just like brawling and like bottles are flying, and you're just like, no, this is team building.
But it is. I mean, that's genuinely the player who I remember specifically was like that. He realized that he upset other players, and I think that's now in his mind as he goes forward and plays, that he should be maybe less like that, and hopefully in future that he will not be like that at all, and kind of like be a player who shares and sees those friendships as more important. And I think that's it. The friends we made along the way, the kind of the most important lesson in some ways.
Oh yeah, well, absolutely, and that's why I love that. Me having more anecdotal evidence of my adult players saying that. So it is absolutely true. They're super stoked to turn up every other week to just have the journey. Like, where's the next stop on the line? It's not our destination, but it's an interesting break to kind of labor a metaphor there. But I so I guess this is also going to be an ageless discussion I'm about to open up here, but because I want to talk about newer players coming in to the hobby, and obviously that's going to be more likely. Perhaps that's wrong, but I would imagine it more likely for younger players because they've had less time being alive to play the game. Stands to reason in my head. And I always, when I started up my game as 6, 4 of them are brand spanking new, completely new. Don't know what it is. Sounds cool. I googled it. There's this thing called Critical Role. That looked good. Oh God, alarm bells flying. But anyway, that was the level of their experience coming in.
Yeah.
And so I, as a quote unquote experienced DM, whatever that means, X years number of DM in various different groups, I kind of want to treat the first chapter or the first arc almost as a prologue, almost as a very set piece elements to have those learning opportunities, I call them. So at the end of the session, I can be like, what? I sound so patronizing because again, I'm talking to people like my seniors as well, but being like, what did you learn from that? And it's stuff like, hey, you don't have to fight everybody. Like, you don't, that might not have necessarily turned into combat, or maybe an NPC, tag along steps in and says, whoa, guys, what about we come to a compromise? And then the players go, oh, can you do that? And I'm like, well, it's happening right now, so of course you can do
it. There was this wonderful article I read, I think it was about a year ago, and it wasn't. I mean, the article actually didn't say much at all. The article was about a mum, who her child was playing D&D, and what a great thing it was to do during the pandemic. And then she was bonding with her son by, I think they got the Heroes Feast book, and then she was cooking through some of that. But there was a wonderful line in the middle of that saying that my son had actually started a game with our family, and he was teaching us that fighting wasn't the only answer. So I think that's such a great thing. That this is a kind of like, it must be a teenage boy teaching adults and his family that fighting is not the only
Oh God,
answer.
Mom, you don't have to kill everyone you meet.
So I think that's so important, and I think that's increasing. Especially with the streamers now, because role playing is so much more of an important aspect of the game than it used to be. So I think, as I said, when I started, it was all about combat. It was all about the strategy. I mean, not 100%. One of the things I've always loved about D&D is the options to negotiate your way around something, or to try and trick the monster, or doing something like that. Actually, one of the saddest things about The Hobbit, the 3 movies that should have been one movie, is the whole thing was a travesty. I'm sorry. I'm going to alien my. I could rant about this for ages.
We'll pad this episode with 50 minutes of you ranting about The Hobbit if you want.
I could do, and about how terrible it is. But one of the saddest things I think in the move from the book to the film is when Bilbo meets the trolls and gets captured by the trolls. Now, in the film, the dwarves and Gandalf attack the trolls, and it's a fight. In the book, actually, Gandalf comes and starts talking to the trolls, and because he's talking to them so much, and I read the book years ago, so I can't remember it very well, but I remember that actually he talks to the trolls until it's morning, and trolls in the when they hit daylight turn to stone. So it's not about combat. It's about Gandalf going and just entertain. I can just imagine that, Gandalf going and telling them stories and making them laugh, and just enjoying his company, and these fascinating stories that this wizard is telling, and then not realizing the time of day it is, And again, that's a wonderful thing, kind of, that I think is a shame it's not in the films.
So I think another thing I wanted to add is once the players have learned that, and they've kind of stepped away from their video game tropes and, you know, kill 7 wolves or whatever, and, you know, this, that, and the other, and you know, problem solving skills. Like if it is to kill 7 wolves, like perhaps they could just go and buy the meat that the person wants and say they've done it, or, you know, 101 other solutions. But what I'm getting at is then later on down the line, when you can kind of turn all that trope on its head. So when you bring in creatures as I'm doing now, that are like mindless aberrations that just only exist to fight and to consume, it means a little bit more, because the players and their characters are like, oh, we this is a rare occurrence where we're actually, our hands are being forced. We can't talk our way. We can't even trick these creatures, because they're just abominations, you know, horrible creatures that don't have a mind, that just exist to destroy and consume. There's no way we can get around this, or at least very few ways we could get around this versus anything else. And it kind of brings the importance of those encounters up a little bit. If every encounter up until that point, it's been fight, this is just another one we fight. But if you've had the mixture of, like, we've bribed the guards, we've talked to the trolls until morning, we've only cut off, you know, their lapels, so we pretend we've killed these people to the person that wants the bounty, and then you get to a point where it's like, no, we can't talk to them, we can't bribe them, we can't placate them, we just these like, it's just a disgusting, horrible task that we're forced to do. It almost brings up what would otherwise be just a routine combat to another layer of, like, I've got to dirty my hands here, and it's disgusting. And I think that is another benefit there of that training cycle.
Yeah, I think that now we are moving more towards that. Especially, I think as a culture, we've become a little bit more aware of the horrors of war and combat, etc. And you know, we see it on the TV, and it becomes more a home. You know, kind of strikes home to us. And the increase now of the game using kind of players wanting to role play. Players wanting to think of clever ways out. I think that's an important evolution of the game. I think that's really good in that sense. But then realizing that sometimes there's no choice. You know, I think that then making that decision and using the tools that they have. I have really been kind of interested in seeing how role-playing games are moving more towards that, you know, kind of role-playing aspect, and it's difficult because how do you put mechanics on role playing or social skills? You don't want to say, I seduced the guard, you know, and roll a d20.
Yeah, because you're basically saying, like, you acted as a human being poorly in a way, which is weird to hear.
Yeah. So no, I mean, it's good to see more of those happening, and as I said, I'm going to be investigating that more. To certainly kind of the students who are attracted to Dungeons and Dragons or role playing games are the nerdy ones, and so social skills. I know quite a few. A lot of what I see online in terms of using practical use of role playing games is to teach those social skills. As I was saying before, but actually trying to write scenarios and write adventures where they have to employ those things is much more interesting. I think that's going to be and hit those learning outcomes from a social skills aspect. That's quite tough.
Yeah, no, I imagine like architecting those in a way that are you know, effective and meaningful is, well, way outside of my area of of expertise. So yeah, I can imagine that's where the gold mine is of those social encounters. And I mean, I fit the stereotype for sure. I certainly, when I was younger, don't like sports, still don't like sports. Sports are for chumps. But also being nerdy. But hey, look at me now. I'm like handsome and charming, modest. So I guess it's you know,
obviously
the proof is in the pudding. Is there anything you wanted to talk about that we haven't quite covered yet?
I would say that something I want to write about as well is, I think that role-playing games, I know that parents can be incredibly busy, but I think that it is one of the best things that parents can do with their children. Obviously not force them, don't force them to do it, but if you enjoy it, then, you know, actually I wrote this kind of just recently, don't force your children to do it, play with your friends, let your children watch when you're playing with their children, and they're naturally curious, they'll want to play with you. But one of the best things that parents can be doing with their children is playing role-playing games, because I remember my parents, certainly my mum, was incredibly worried about one or two friends I made as being bad influences.
Yep.
I mean, this is normal Chinese parents, to be honest with you. In fact, this is normal any parents, kind of like, that person is a bad influence for you.
Yep.
And, and I see it in the kind of the boarding house, where the kind of, I mean, some of the boys in the boarding house are, incredibly, well-mannered and well-behaved, and, kind of, but actually I had this, one boy who was quite a devout Muslim boy. And so one of the students decided to DM, and we were heading through this little village. Listeners will probably know, what adventure I'm talking about, but we were trying to avoid these cultists and these, I think, the kobolds, this cult of the dragon. And we had these villagers with us, and we were trying to get to the central keep. And the village was, the town was on fire, and these houses were on fire, and we were creeping from house to house to try and, avoid the patrols of these cultists. Anyway, one of this boy, who is a really nice, sweet boy, he said, "I'm going to loot the house." And I was playing as a paladin, and I was kind of like, I didn't want to kind of put my, I don't know. Then I started role playing. It's just like, what are you doing? The villagers are right there.
Yeah.
What are they going to do if we're looting their house? But his mind was, but it's burning down anyway. It's going to get destroyed anyway. And he didn't see that connect there. And kind of, it took quite a while for me to argue and convince him that this was a bad thing to do, that either they would run away from us because we're just looters, or they would attack us because we're looting their houses. For him, it was because he was very much in a video game mentality. It's just like, stuff is there, I'm going to loot it. It's going to destroy anyway, so I'm going to loot it. But again, in reality, I'm sure he would never do that because he's such a sweet boy. But it's weird, because it then opens up those opportunities kind of for parents to be talking to their children about morality, about ethics, about kind of the way they go about things, about the life decisions they make. It'll open up these, but also they'll get to know when you play with somebody, and I think you find this, I'm sure you find this with your players, you know them so much more deeply in terms of the choices they make, the kind of the moral choices especially. And yes, sometimes they're role playing. I've got this one player who was in my game, who kind of, he really would embody the character and do things that were very out of character for him, which I found amazing. And that's an amazing as a player. But otherwise, generally, you learn a lot about your players, just the way they interact with each other, the way you can, as you said, rely on them or not rely on them. But imagine now being a kind of like a parent, and seeing, actually, this is something that parents can only see just generally, but when they play role-playing games with their children, they'll see so much more deeply, and they'll open up those avenues for conversation about those things. And I think that's incredibly important and powerful.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we've put a nice bookend there, because we've talked and started a lot about it being an educational vehicle for the players and the students and whatnot, and we've ended with how the DM can learn something about other people and stuff. So it's a very nice, very, very wholesome closed loop. So thank you very much for this for this chat today, Sam.
Well, thank you again for having me. It's been great.
Is there anything you would like to promote?
So I have a podcast that I'm going to launch in the next couple of weeks. It is just a few interviews with educators. Other than that, you can find me online on Facebook and Twitter, mainly as the Educational DM. And I mean, it's a lot of DM stuff, but it's a lot of educational stuff as well. So that is something you might want to go and have a look at. My blog articles, which are mostly about education and how D&D either can be used for education or is educational, is on dumpstadadventures.com. So just search that out, dump stat adventures, and you'll come up with a blog. And, I write an article maybe once every couple of months when I get the time. But yeah, that's, I've got so much to say, but just not enough time to say it.
Yeah, that's always the way. Yeah. I mean, and most of what you want to say is, ragging on The Hobbit. So,
Yes. Oh, what a terrible film. Who's terrible set of films.
Sorry, I didn't mean to trigger you again on just to turn back to it. But
I really wanted to love those films. But,
by the time this episode comes out, I imagine your podcast is probably full steam ahead anyway. So, as usual, we'll put all the links in the description. Please do check it out. It's been such a fun and an interesting and, dare I say, educational chat today. So yeah, all that's left for me to say is, again, thank you once more, Sam. It's been super fun and super interesting. So yep, thanks again.
Well, again, thank you. It has been fun. It's good to talk about these things. I just, in some ways, I can't stop talking about these things. And actually, I'm going to be back in the UK in the next year from September. So who knows? I might pop down to Southampton.
Sunny Southampton. That's amazing.
Let's get a drink.
So yeah, for sure. Some health beer, maybe.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, some
all beer to me is health beer. Oh God, that sounds bad. Anyway, moving on. Thank you again. Thank you everybody for listening at home. Please check out all of Sam's stuff, and also please check out all of my stuff. Drop a review if you've enjoyed today's episode. Otherwise, thank you all for listening, and good night. And now it's time for the Patreon shout-outs. Once again, thank you to Matt Street at mpstreet88 on Twitter for supporting the show. If you need support running your personal or business schedule, head to virtualtimehustle.com or on Instagram to make that difference between should do and done. Boss it better with support from Kat, who will help you get back that essential time you've been searching for. If you would like to support what we do and get 4 shout-outs a month, head over to patreon.com/thinkingcritically, or you can just buy me a coffee at ko-fi.com/thinkingcritically. And because it's Christmas Eve, I wanted to wish you all a very Merry Christmas. No matter where you are or what you're doing, I hope you have a very lovely time celebrating with those closest to you. Once again, just you listening to the show is a good enough Christmas present for me. So, however, saying that, you can now leave 5-star, any ratings, but, 5-star would be nice, directly on the Spotify app. So if you really wanted to give me a lovely Christmas present, you could go and drop me a nice little 5-star rating on Spotify, or whatever rating you think is fit. And do keep your ears open for the next episode, which is dropping on New Year's Eve this year. That is the one to take us out of 2021. So look forward to that one, guys, and I will see you then. Goodbye.